Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. If you're using this to fall asleep, get cozy, and relax, don't forget to subscribe, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Alright, let's get into the story. In the waning days of summer 1990, the city of Gainesville, Florida, buzzed with the vibrant energy of a new academic year at the University of Florida. Thousands of students flooded back to campus, their voices echoing through dormitories as they unpacked, decorated their rooms, and prepared for classes. The warm August air carried a sense of optimism, the promise of new beginnings, and the excitement of reconnecting with friends. But this hopeful atmosphere would soon be shattered by a series of horrific events that plunged the town into a nightmare, casting a long, dark shadow over the community. On August 24, 1990, the bodies of two college freshmen, Sonia Larson and Christina Powell, were discovered in their off-campus apartment. The scene was chilling. Police were immediately alarmed by the brutality of the attack, which appeared to have occurred overnight. Signs of forced entry suggested a deliberate and violent intrusion. The discovery sent shockwaves through Gainesville, but the horror was only beginning. Less than 24 hours later, another student, Krista Hoyt, was found murdered in her home. The community barely had time to process this second tragedy when, within the next 2 days, two more victims, Tracy Poles and Manuel Tabawada, were discovered in a nearby apartment complex. In just 4 days, 5 young people, all college students, had been killed. Fear gripped Gainesville, particularly among students, as the realization sank in that a predator was targeting their peers. Local news stations broadcasted round-the-clock updates, fueling a torrent of rumors that swirled across campus and town. Parents, frantic with worry, began pulling their children out of school. Gun stores and locksmiths were overwhelmed with requests as residents armed themselves and fortified their homes. Many students started sleeping in groups for safety, while others fled Gainesville entirely, terrified that the killer could strike again at any moment. The once lively college town had become a place of dread. Law enforcement responded swiftly, forming a multi-agency task force that included the Gainesville Police Department, the Alachua County Sheriff's Office, and the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. The FBI was called in to provide behavioral profiling expertise. Investigators theorized that the killer was likely a lone male, someone who blended seamlessly into the community, calm, calculating, and highly organized. But with no clear suspect identified, the task force faced immense pressure. The search intensified as tips poured in, but the first few weeks yielded no arrests. Gainesville remained a city paralyzed by fear. Community leaders and university officials publicly urged calm, but behind closed doors, even seasoned investigators admitted the case's profound emotional toll. The murders had not only devastated the victims' families, but also left an indelible mark on the public psyche. As detectives meticulously examined the crime scenes, they noted disturbing patterns. All the victims had been attacked at night, with clear signs of premeditation. The killer used a knife, and the attacks were methodical, executed with chilling precision. Most troubling, however, was the absence of physical evidence tying anyone to the crimes. No fingerprints, no eyewitnesses, and, at the time, no conclusive DNA. Determined to prevent the case from going cold, investigators pressed on, sifting through hundreds of tips and leads. Yet none brought them closer to identifying the perpetrator. The murders had stopped as abruptly as they began, heightening the public's anxiety. The lack of a continuing pattern made the killer even harder to track. Then a quiet breakthrough emerged from an unexpected source, not in Gainesville, but in Ocala, Florida, about 40 miles away. Local police in Ocala had arrested a drifter named Danny Rolling for an unrelated string of burglaries and an attempted robbery at a grocery store. Rolling, 36 at the time, was apprehended while hiding in a campsite in the woods. Among the items recovered were tools, duct tape, a cassette recorder, and most crucially, audio diaries in which Rolling had recorded disturbing messages. These tapes hinted at deep personal torment, crimes not yet uncovered. At first, Rolling seemed unremarkable, a man with a history of petty crimes, a troubled upbringing, and a life marked by instability. Born in 1954 in Shreveport, Louisiana, Danny Rolling had endured a childhood scarred by abuse. His father, a local police officer, was reportedly cold, violently critical, and physically abusive, shaping Rowling's early years with tension and fear. As an adult, Rowling struggled to hold steady jobs or maintain relationships, drifting through life with no clear purpose. Investigators were struck by how closely Rowling's background aligned with the psychological profile they had developed for the Gainesville killer. Digging deeper, they confirmed that Rowling had been in Gainesville during the exact week of the murders. His campsite, located near the University of Florida, appeared to have served as a base of operations. The pivotal moment came when law enforcement matched a DNA sample from Rowling to evidence found at the Gainesville crime scenes. This forensic link was a turning point, confirming that they had the right man and bringing a wave of relief to a community that had lived in terror for months. Further investigation into Rowling's past uncovered even darker truths. Authorities connected him to a triple homicide in Shreveport in 1989, where a woman, her nephew, and her grandson were killed in a crime bearing eerie similarities to the Gainesville murders. Though never officially tried for the Shreveport case, many investigators believe this marked the escalation of Rowling's violent impulses. In 1991, Danny Rowling was charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder for the Gainesville crimes. Facing overwhelming evidence and already serving time for the robbery charges, Rowling pleaded guilty in 1994, just before his trial was set to begin. In court, he admitted to the killings, offering a chilling explanation for his actions. Through his writings and recorded statements, Rowling revealed a fantasy-driven motivation, fueled by delusions and a twisted desire for notoriety. He claimed he had been trying to become someone, a statement that left many grappling with the depth of his depravity. The court sentenced him to death, bringing a measure of legal closure to a case that had gripped Gainesville in fear. For the victims' families, however, the emotional journey was far from over. The aftermath of the Gainesville murders left deep scars, not only on those who had lost loved ones, but also on the city and its wider community. The case became a defining moment for the University of Florida, forever intertwining the memories of many students' college years with the terror of those August days. The murders of Sonia Larson, Christina Powell, Chris DeHoyt, Tracy Poles, and Manuel Tabawada were not just criminal acts. They were personal tragedies that shattered the lives of those who loved them. Survivors of Rowling's attacks, including those who narrowly escaped, carried the weight of their trauma for years. Many sought counseling and support to rebuild their lives, but the fear and grief remained an ever-present shadow. Danny Rowling's sentencing and eventual execution were a long, drawn-out process. Though formally sentenced to death in 1996, it wasn't until October 25, 2006, that Florida carried out the sentence. During his time on death row, Rowling's behavior remained erratic, and his claims of seeking fame through murder were frequently cited in psychiatric reports. In his final moments, he expressed remorse, but many found it hard to believe, given the calculated brutality of his crimes. Rowling's execution marked the end of a painful chapter for Gainesville. By then, the case had been exhaustively explored in books, documentaries, and media coverage, embedding the events in the public consciousness. The Gainesville Ripper became a part of American criminal history, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath ordinary lives. The crimes also spurred advancements in law enforcement and criminal justice. The use of DNA evidence in Rowling's conviction was groundbreaking at the time, highlighting the growing importance of genetic forensics. Investigators began collaborating more closely with mental health professionals to understand the psychological drivers behind such extreme violence. The case also raised awareness about the impact of violent crime on communities, particularly in college towns where young people are often living away from home for the first time. Universities and local governments in Gainesville and beyond strengthened campus safety measures. Surveillance systems were upgraded, and student orientations began, including discussions on safety, emergency protocols, and community vigilance. As Gainesville slowly recovered, the memory of the Gainesville Ripper endured. The victims were honored through scholarships, memorials, and annual services held by their families. Their stories were shared to prevent such violence from recurring. For the people of Gainesville, the events of 1990 remain a painful chapter, but also a testament to resilience. Despite the horror, the town continued to grow and thrive, its spirit unbroken. The legacy of the Gainesville Ripper serves as both a reminder of the fragility of safety and the strength of communities in the face of unspeakable tragedy. On the morning of April 20th, 1999, the students of Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado, began their day like any other. The spring sun shone brightly, casting a warm glow over the suburban campus. Seniors chatted about upcoming prom plans, while younger students hurried to classes, their backpacks slung over their shoulders. For most, it was just another ordinary school day, filled with the familiar rhythm of lessons, laughter, and lunchtime chatter. Among the students were seniors Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, two young men who, unbeknownst to their peers and teachers, had spent the previous night preparing for an act of unimaginable violence that would forever alter the landscape of American schools. At 11:19 a.m., the normalcy of the day shattered. As students filled the cafeteria, enjoying their lunch and catching up with friends, Harris and Klebold entered the building, their duffel bags heavy with explosives and firearms. Their plan was meticulously calculated. They positioned homemade bombs in strategic locations around the school, hoping to unleash chaos and maximize carnage. But the explosives failed to detonate as intended, forcing the pair to pivot to a more direct approach. Armed with semi-automatic rifles, shotguns, and handguns, they began shooting indiscriminately, targeting anyone in their path. The first shots rang out in the cafeteria, sending students and faculty into a frenzy. Screams filled the air as tables were overturned, and teenagers scrambled for cover, their lunches abandoned. The gunfire echoed through the halls, creating a disorienting cacophony of terror and confusion. Harris and Klebold moved with chilling purpose, their faces devoid of mercy as they fired on their classmates and teachers. The once safe space of Columbine High School had become a battlefield. As the attack unfolded, the pair roamed the building, shooting at anyone they encountered. At 11:35 a.m., they crossed paths with Dave Sanders, a beloved teacher who was heroically guiding students to safety. Sanders, determined to protect those in his care, was gunned down by the attackers. His death was a devastating blow to the school community, a symbol of the senseless loss that would define the day. Meanwhile, the death toll continued to rise. Students were shot in hallways, classrooms, and stairwells, some fatally, others left with life-altering injuries. Many were trapped, hiding under desks or in locked rooms, their hearts pounding as they whispered prayers, unsure if they would survive. By the time law enforcement arrived, the situation had escalated into a full-scale emergency. At approximately 12:08 p.m., SWAT teams were deployed, securing the perimeter and preparing to enter the building. But the operation was fraught with danger. Harris and Klebold, who had taken several students hostage, grew increasingly erratic and aggressive, their actions fueled by a volatile mix of rage and nihilism. The atmosphere inside the school was one of unrelenting fear, as survivors huddled in silence, listening to the distant sound of gunfire and footsteps. The shooting spree lasted nearly 49 minutes, though for those caught in its grip, it felt like an eternity. By the time Harris and Klebold turned their weapons on themselves, ending their lives with self-inflicted gunshot wounds, the toll was staggering. 12 students and 1 teacher lay dead, and 21 others were injured. The attackers died before law enforcement could apprehend them, leaving behind a scene of devastation that would shock the nation. For the first time in U.S. history, a school shooting of such magnitude had occurred, exposing the vulnerability of a place meant to be a sanctuary for learning and growth. In the days that followed, the FBI and other law enforcement agencies launched one of the largest criminal investigations in American history. The focus was not only on understanding the logistics of the attack, but also on unraveling the motives of Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold. Both were students at Columbine High School, and though they had distinct personalities, they shared a deep-seated anger and resentment toward their peers. Harris, described as intelligent but deeply disturbed, had a history of writing violent, hate-filled journals that revealed his contempt for society, which he believed had rejected him. Klebold, more socially withdrawn, was heavily influenced by Harris's ideology, their friendship forged in middle school and cemented by a shared descent into darkness. Through interviews with classmates, teachers, and family members, investigators learned that Harris and Klebold had spent months planning the attack. They had researched bomb-making, studied firearms, and mapped out the logistics of a mass shooting. Their ambitions extended beyond the school. They had intended to detonate bombs at a nearby Walmart and other locations to amplify their destruction, but these plans failed when the school bombs malfunctioned. Online, the pair had left a trail of disturbing content. Harris posted violent rants and threats on his personal website, while Klebold's private journals echoed similar themes of hatred and despair. Yet, these warning signs had gone largely unnoticed, as both young men maintained an outward appearance of normalcy, blending into the fabric of student life. The investigation confirmed that Harris and Klebold acted alone, dispelling rumors of a larger conspiracy or external support. Their motives appeared rooted in a toxic blend of perceived rejection, loneliness, and a desire for revenge against a society they felt had ostracized them. The community of Littleton, along with the nation, grappled with the complexity of these motivations. Was the attack a result of bullying? A failure of the mental health system? A lack of parental awareness? These questions dominated media coverage and sparked heated debates about school safety, gun control, and societal responsibility. The shockwaves from Columbine reverberated across the United States and beyond, igniting a national conversation about gun violence, school security, mental health, and the influence of media. In the immediate aftermath, schools nationwide implemented stricter safety measures, including lockdown drills, metal detectors, and enhanced security protocols. The tragedy reshaped how society viewed the risks faced by young people, particularly those who felt isolated or marginalized. Public schools adopted zero-tolerance policies for bullying and violence, and support programs aimed at addressing mental health issues gained traction. The government increased funding for initiatives to identify at-risk youth before they turned to destructive behaviors, emphasizing the importance of fostering a sense of belonging in schools. The Columbine shooting also became a flashpoint for the gun control debate. The ease with which Harris and Klebold accessed high-powered firearms, legally purchased through intermediaries, raised urgent questions about the nation's gun laws. While the debate over the Second Amendment remained unresolved, the tragedy underscored the need for better regulation and monitoring of gun sales. In the years that followed, copycat incidents and subsequent school shootings kept the issue in the public eye, fueling calls for reform. The term Columbine effect entered the lexicon, describing the phenomenon where other would-be shooters drew inspiration from Harris and Klebold's actions. This chilling legacy intensified efforts to rethink how media covered such events, with a growing consensus that focusing less on perpetrators and more on victims could help mitigate the risk of glorification. For the families of the victims, the healing process was a long and painful journey. Memorials and scholarships were established to honor the 12 students and one teacher who lost their lives, while survivors sought therapy and support to cope with the trauma. April 20th became a day of remembrance, not only for those who died, but also for those who carry the emotional scars of that horrific day. The Columbine High School shooting fundamentally altered how Americans viewed school safety, mental health, and gun violence. It raised more questions than answers, and its impact endures decades later. Often cited as a turning point in the national conversation about gun violence, Columbine remains one of the darkest chapters in American education history. The aftermath left an indelible mark on the public consciousness, sparking multifaceted discussions about prevention and response. The tragedy prompted a seismic shift in how schools approach security. Columbine was not the first school shooting, but its scale and visibility made it a wake-up call. Schools were no longer seen as invulnerable sanctuaries. In response, districts nationwide adopted rigorous safety protocols, from hiring security personnel to installing surveillance systems. Active shooter drills became a grim but necessary part of school life, preparing students and staff for the unthinkable. The role of media violence also came under scrutiny. Harris and Klebold's fascination with violent video games, movies, and music fueled debates about whether such content could desensitize young people or inspire real-world aggression. While some argue that media played a significant role, others counter that millions consumed similar content without resorting to violence, pointing to deeper societal issues like isolation and untreated mental health conditions. For the families of the victims, the pain of Columbine was a wound that never fully healed. The parents of students like Cassie Bernal and Rachel Scott became advocates for school safety and mental health reform, channeling their grief into efforts to prevent future tragedies. The Rachel Scott Memorial Fund, for example, supported anti-bullying initiatives, honoring a young woman whose kindness had touched many. Survivors, too, faced a long road to recovery. Those physically injured endured grueling rehabilitation, while others grappled with post-traumatic stress, their lives forever altered by the events of that day. The Columbine High School shooting became a catalyst for movements like March for Our Lives, which emerged years later in response to the 2018 Parkland shooting. Survivors of Columbine and other tragedies played a pivotal role in shaping these advocacy efforts, amplifying the voices of young people demanding change. In many ways, Columbine set a precedent for understanding how a single event could reshape public policy, societal attitudes, and the collective psyche of a generation. Though the pain of April 20th, 1999 can never be erased, the lessons learned continue to guide efforts to create safer, more compassionate communities. In the late summer of 1971, the United States was a nation grappling with profound social and political turmoil. The Vietnam War raged on, fueling anti-war protests, while the civil rights movement had left both hard-won progress and deep societal wounds. Issues of racial inequality, police brutality, and inhumane prison conditions were at the forefront of national debates. Against this tense backdrop, one of the most significant and tragic prison uprisings in American history unfolded at the Attica Correctional Facility in upstate New York, a moment that would expose the brutal realities of the nation's penal system and ignite calls for reform. Attica Correctional Facility, located in the rural town of Attica, New York, housed over 2,200 inmates, the majority of whom were Black or Latino men. In stark contrast, nearly all the prison guards and staff were white, many hailing from nearby rural communities with little exposure to the diverse backgrounds of the incarcerated population. This racial and cultural divide mirrored broader societal tensions, creating a volatile environment within the prison's walls. Conditions at Attica were dehumanizing and oppressive. Inmates were permitted only one shower per week and rationed a single roll of toilet paper per month. Their letters were censored, and they endured verbal harassment, sometimes escalating to physical abuse from guards. Opportunities for education or rehabilitation were virtually non-existent, and medical care was woefully inadequate, leaving sick or injured inmates to suffer without proper treatment. For months, inmates had voiced their grievances through formal complaints and appeals to the prison administration, but their pleas were consistently ignored. By early September, frustration had reached a boiling point. Inspired by the broader civil rights movement and driven by a growing sense of injustice, inmates began to organize, demanding better living conditions, political rights, religious freedom, and an end to the systemic abuse they endured. Their requests went unanswered, setting the stage for a confrontation that would shake the nation. On the morning of September 9, 1971, a seemingly minor scuffle between a few inmates and correctional officers sparked a full-scale uprising. In a matter of moments, approximately 1,300 inmates seized control of the prison's D-yard, a large outdoor courtyard, and took 42 staff members hostage. What could have descended into chaos instead became a remarkably organized occupation. The inmates established a leadership committee, with Elliot L.D. Barkley, a young and charismatic inmate, emerging as a passionate voice for justice. Barkley and others set up security posts, medical stations, and took measures to protect the hostages from harm, demonstrating a commitment to discipline and order. The inmates drafted a list of 28 demands, which included calls for amnesty for their actions during the uprising, improved medical care, fair visitation rights, religious freedom, and an end to abusive treatment. To ensure transparency, they invited representatives from the media, civil rights activists, lawyers, and state politicians to witness the negotiations. Notable figures, including civil rights attorney William Kunstler and New York State Assemblyman Arthur O. Eve, served as intermediaries, entering the prison to facilitate dialogue. For several days, negotiations showed signs of progress, and the inmates expressed a willingness to resolve the standoff peacefully, hopeful that their demands would be met. Despite these efforts, the state government, led by New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller, remained steadfast in its refusal to grant amnesty or concede to several of the inmates' key demands. Rockefeller, under pressure from law enforcement and political allies, declined to visit the prison or offer assurances that could de-escalate the situation, even ignoring personal appeals from national figures, including President Richard Nixon, who had been briefed on the crisis. As negotiations stalled, tensions inside and outside the prison escalated, and the mood grew increasingly fraught. On the morning of September 13th, after 4 days of standoff, the state made the fateful decision to retake the prison by force. At approximately 9:46 a.m., Helicopters roared over the facility, dropping canisters of CN and CS tear gas into the D-yard. The choking clouds blinded and disoriented everyone inside, inmates and hostages alike. Moments later, over 500 state police and correctional officers stormed the yard, armed with high-powered rifles, shotguns, and batons, under orders to regain control at all costs. The assault was swift and brutal. Officers fired more than 2,000 rounds of ammunition in less than 15 minutes, unleashing a barrage of gunfire that tore through the smoke-filled chaos. Inmates, many unarmed and incapacitated by the tear gas, were shot as they lay on the ground or fled for cover. Eyewitnesses later reported hearing officers shout racial slurs and threats as they fired indiscriminately into the crowd. There was no attempt to distinguish between violent participants, peaceful inmates, or hostages caught in the crossfire. The fear, confusion, and thick smoke made it impossible to identify friend from foe. Tragically, 10 of the 42 hostages were killed during the assault, alongside 29 inmates. Among the dead was Elliot Barkley, who, according to multiple accounts, had surrendered and was unarmed when he was shot. His death became a powerful symbol of the silencing of the inmates' demands for dignity and justice. Initially, state officials claimed that the hostages had been killed by the inmates, alleging they had been stabbed or had their throats slit. This narrative, however, was swiftly debunked by Dr. John Edland, the Monroe County medical examiner, whose autopsies revealed that all 10 hostages died from gunshot wounds inflicted by law enforcement, not by prisoners. This revelation contradicted the state's account and cast a damning light on the operation, exposing it as a tragic and avoidable massacre driven by haste, fear, and misjudgment. In the immediate aftermath, survivors described scenes of unimaginable cruelty. Inmates were stripped naked, forced to crawl through yards littered with broken glass, and made to lie face down for hours without medical attention. Some were beaten with batons or rifle butts if they moved or spoke, while others endured torture and humiliation. Over 100 people were seriously injured, their wounds compounded by the lack of prompt care. Outside the prison, families of both inmates and hostages gathered in anguish, desperate for news of their loved ones. Activists, journalists, and attorneys demanded answers, while civil rights organizations like the NAACP and ACLU condemned the state's actions, calling for accountability. The state initially attempted to control the narrative, denying wrongdoing and blaming the inmates for the violence. But as survivors and witnesses came forward, a different story emerged, one of systemic abuse, excessive force, and a refusal to treat incarcerated men as human beings. The violent retaking of Attica shocked the nation, becoming a symbol of failed leadership and entrenched injustice. For many, particularly those in the civil rights and prison reform movements, the events of September 13, 1971, lay bare the state's brutal response to demands for basic human rights. In the weeks and months that followed, the uprising sparked a wave of legal, political, and social responses, though justice and healing would take decades to even partially materialize. Public outrage led to the formation of several independent investigations, most notably the McKay Commission, chaired by Robert B. McKay, Dean of New York University Law School. The commission's report was scathing, criticizing the state for its use of overwhelming force and failure to pursue peaceful alternatives. It concluded that the violence could have been prevented and that the state bore primary responsibility for the deaths. Yet, despite these findings, accountability remained elusive. While dozens of inmates were indicted for crimes related to the uprising, no state officials or law enforcement personnel faced criminal charges for the killings of hostages or inmates, deepening the sense of injustice. Attorneys and human rights advocates launched a decades-long legal battle on behalf of the prisoners. Many survivors reported being tortured, denied medical care, and held in solitary confinement for months after the retaking. Lawsuits piled up. It wasn't until 2000 that New York State agreed to pay $8 million in damages to over 500 former inmates for the abuse they endured. The settlement, while historic, was seen by many as insufficient and belated. Families of the slain hostages also received financial compensation, but for many, it did little to ease their grief or address their demand for transparency and a formal apology. Attica became more than a prison. It became a symbol. The word Attica echoed in protests, music, and speeches, a rallying cry against systemic injustice. In 1975, the film Dog Day Afternoon captured this sentiment when Al Pacino's character shouted, "Attica! Attica!" to invoke the uprising's legacy of police overreach and brutality. The rebellion galvanized the prison reform movement, bringing public attention to the dire conditions inside American prisons. Activists began demanding better health care, access to legal representation, religious freedom, educational opportunities, and fair disciplinary procedures for inmates. The tragedy also highlighted the racial and economic disparities within the prison system, with Attica serving as a microcosm of broader societal inequities. In the decades since, the memory of Attica has remained both painful and powerful. Survivors and families continue to gather annually to honor those who died and to educate new generations about the uprising's significance. In 2021, marking the 50th anniversary, a series of commemorative events, documentaries, and panel discussions took place nationwide, drawing on declassified documents and first-hand testimonies to shed new light on the tragedy. The state of New York issued an official acknowledgement of the events, though a full public apology from the government has yet to materialize. Elliot Barkley's words, spoken before his death, continue to resonate. "We are men. We are not beasts, and we do not intend to be beaten or driven as such." His statement encapsulated the pain, dignity, and desperation of those behind Attica's walls, serving as a haunting reminder of what happens when justice, humanity, and dignity are denied. The Attica uprising remains one of the most poignant chapters in American criminal justice history, a testament to the resilience of those who dared to demand change and a call to confront the systemic failures that persist in the nation's prisons. By the dawn of 1978, Theodore Ted Bundy was already one of the most wanted fugitives in the United States. Charismatic, intelligent, and disarmingly articulate, he had evaded capture multiple times, leaving a trail of devastation across several states. Law enforcement agencies in Utah, Colorado, Washington, and Oregon were piecing together a chilling pattern of missing young women, many of whom were later found murdered. Bundy's crimes were shrouded in mystery, his ability to slip through the cracks confounding investigators. After orchestrating his second daring escape from a Colorado jail in December 1977, Bundy vanished, setting the stage for a terrifying final chapter in his violent saga, one that would culminate in one of the most infamous nights in American criminal history. By January 1978, Bundy had crossed the country, making his way to Florida. Traveling in a stolen vehicle and using false identities, he managed to remain undetected. Settling in Tallahassee under the alias Chris Hagen, he rented a room near the campus of Florida State University, blending into the vibrant college town. He frequented local bars, relied on stolen credit cards for food and supplies, and adopted the persona of a typical student. But beneath this facade, his predatory urges were resurfacing, growing stronger with each passing day. Within weeks, his compulsion to kill returned with a vengeance, unleashing a spree of violence more brazen and brutal than ever before. In the early morning hours of January 15, 1978, Bundy targeted the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University. Around 3 a.m., he slipped through a rear door with a faulty lock, armed with a piece of oak firewood he wielded as a club. The house was quiet, its residents asleep, unaware of the danger creeping through the halls. His first victim was Margaret Bowman, a 21-year-old student who was sleeping peacefully in her bed. Bundy bludgeoned her with savage force, the blows crushing her skull, before strangling her with a nylon stocking. The attack was swift and merciless, leaving no chance for resistance. Moments later, Bundy entered the room of Lisa Levy, a 20-year-old sorority sister. His assault on her was even more ferocious. He beat her with the firewood, inflicting severe trauma, and sexually assaulted her, leaving distinct bite marks on her body, marks that would later become critical evidence. The violence was unrelenting as he moved through the house, targeting Karen Chandler and Kathy Kleiner next. Both women were brutally attacked, sustaining serious injuries to their heads and faces, yet miraculously survived, their resilience a testament to their strength in the face of unimaginable horror. Bundy's rampage through the Chi Omega house lasted less than 15 minutes, and he fled undetected, leaving a scene of carnage that would shock even seasoned investigators. The audacity of the attack stunned authorities. For victims in a single house, Located in the heart of a bustling campus, attacked with such ferocity, it marked a dramatic escalation in Bundy's methods. His caution had eroded, replaced by a reckless disregard for consequences, as if he no longer cared about concealing his actions. But his violence didn't end with the sorority house. Just a few blocks away, later that same night, Bundy broke into the apartment of Cheryl Thomas, a Florida State dance major. He attacked her with the same oak club, fracturing her jaw and causing permanent injuries, including partial hearing loss. The sound of her struggle alerted neighbors, who called police, forcing Bundy to flee before he could finish the assault. The attacks sent ripples of fear through Tallahassee and the university community. Students, once carefree, now locked their doors and traveled in groups, their sense of security shattered. Despite the growing panic, Bundy remained elusive, his ability to blend in keeping him one step ahead of the law. He stole another car and left Tallahassee, heading south toward Jacksonville, before veering to Lake City, Florida. On February 9, 1978, he committed his most heartbreaking crime yet, abducting and murdering 12-year-old Kimberly Leach, who had just left her junior high school classroom. The randomness and brutality of targeting a child marked a chilling departure from his previous pattern of attacking college-aged women. Kimberly's body would not be found until weeks later, hidden in a remote area, her death a devastating blow to her family and community. The murder of Kimberly Leach intensified the manhunt for Bundy, with authorities from multiple counties and the FBI now fully mobilized. The urgency to capture him reached a fever pitch, as investigators recognized the escalating danger he posed. On February 15, 1978, Bundy's luck finally ran out. While driving a stolen Volkswagen Beetle in Pensacola, he was pulled over by Officer David Lee for a routine traffic stop. Bundy gave a false name and attempted to flee, leading to a brief scuffle. Officer Lee subdued him, and a search of the car revealed stolen IDs, 21 stolen credit cards, and a dark brown wig, items that hinted at the scope of his deception. Initially, Bundy refused to reveal his true identity, but within days, his fingerprints confirmed the truth. The man in custody was Ted Bundy, one of the most notorious serial killers in modern history. The nation was stunned. Bundy, who had twice escaped justice, had crossed the country to kill again, his crimes growing bolder with each act. Public outrage swelled as more victims were linked to him, and the pressure to hold him accountable intensified. His arrest in Florida set the stage for one of the most high-profile criminal trials in American history, with the Chi Omega case serving as the cornerstone of the prosecution. The forensic evidence, eyewitness accounts, and testimony from surviving victims would prove overwhelming. Central to the case was the bite mark evidence left on Lisa Levy's body. Forensic odontologists matched the marks to Bundy's dental impressions, a groundbreaking use of bite mark analysis that marked one of the earliest instances of such evidence in a major trial. Bundy, ever the showman, insisted on representing himself in court, turning the proceedings into a spectacle. The trial, which began in June 1979 in Miami, was the first to be nationally televised, captivating audiences and setting a precedent for media coverage of high-profile cases. Bundy treated the courtroom like a stage, cross-examining witnesses with theatrical flair, delivering impassioned speeches, and even proposing marriage to Carol and Boone, a witness who later became his wife. His behavior oscillated between calculated charm and volatile outbursts, a stark contrast to the gravity of the charges against him. Despite his theatrics, the evidence was damning. Survivors Kathy Kleiner and Karen Chandler bravely took the stand, recounting the terror of that night with unwavering courage. Police officers and forensic experts testified about the physical evidence, including fibers from the crime scene that matched clothing in Bundy's possession and shoe prints inside the house that corresponded to his shoes. Graphic photographs of the victims' injuries were shown to the jury, their brutality leaving the courtroom in stunned silence. After less than 7 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict on July 24, 1979, convicting Bundy of the murders of Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy, as well as the attempted murders of Kathy Kleiner and Karen Chandler. He was sentenced to death by electric chair. A second trial in Orlando in 1980 for the abduction and murder of Kimberly Leach resulted in another death sentence. While on death row, Bundy's case drew the attention of psychologists, criminologists, and FBI profilers who saw him as a textbook psychopath, charming, manipulative, and utterly devoid of remorse. His crimes were methodical, driven by a predatory instinct that left a trail of shattered lives. In the mid-1980s, Bundy began offering confessions, hoping to delay his execution. He admitted to over 30 murders across multiple states, though experts believe the true number could be as high as 40 or 50. He often withheld details, maintaining control over investigators even from behind bars. These confessions aided FBI profiler Robert Ressler and others in developing early frameworks for understanding serial killers, influencing investigative techniques for future cases. After years of appeals and failed bids for clemency, Ted Bundy was executed on January 24, 1989, at Florida State Prison via electrocution, known colloquially as Old Sparky. The public reaction was unprecedented. Hundreds gathered outside the prison the night before, chanting "Burn, Bundy, burn," and setting off fireworks when the lights flickered, signaling his death. Reporters noted Bundy's calm demeanor in his final moments. He declined a special meal and offered no last confession, instead directing his lawyer and spiritual advisor to convey love to his family and friends. Per his request, his ashes were scattered in Washington's Cascade Mountains, near where many of his early victims were found. The Chi Omega murders and Bundy's 1978 spree left an indelible mark on America's legal, cultural, and psychological landscape. The case underscored the need for interstate cooperation, as Bundy's ability to exploit jurisdictional gaps had allowed him to evade capture for years. The FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, VICAP, was developed in part to address such failures. The use of bite mark evidence, though controversial today, was a milestone in forensic science, alongside other physical trace evidence and witness testimony. Bundy's case shattered stereotypes about serial killers. He was not a shadowy monster, but a clean-cut, educated man who used charm to gain trust. This forced society to confront the unsettling reality that danger could hide in plain sight. The televised trial, coupled with Bundy's manipulative charisma, turned him into a perverse kind of celebrity. While many followed the case out of horror, others sent fan letters and marriage proposals, blurring the line between journalism and sensationalism. This sparked ongoing debates about media ethics in covering violent criminals. Bundy's crimes have since been dissected in documentaries, books, and films, from Netflix series to true crime podcasts, not to glorify him but to probe the psychology of evil and the systemic failures that allowed him to kill for so long. The 1978 crimes marked the culmination of one of the most horrifying criminal sagas in U.S. history. Bundy's capture and trial brought justice for his victims, but they also reshaped how America investigates and understands serial crime. The lessons from his case continue to influence law enforcement, psychology, and public safety, serving as a chilling reminder that vigilance, science, and courage can bring even the most elusive predators to account. For the survivors and families of the victims, the execution offered closure, but the pain of their losses endures, a testament to the lives stolen by a man who hid his darkness behind a mask of charm. In the early 1970s, Ogden, Utah, was a quiet, picturesque city nestled against the rugged Wasatch Mountains. Known for its family-friendly neighborhoods, vibrant downtown, and the strong military presence of Hill Air Force Base, Ogden exuded a sense of calm and community. But beneath this serene exterior, a sinister plan was taking shape in the minds of two young airmen stationed at the base, a plan that would culminate in one of the most horrific crimes in Utah's history. Dale Selby Pierre and William Andrews, both serving at Hill Air Force Base, began their descent into darkness in 1972. Pierre, the older of the two, was a charismatic yet volatile figure. Intelligent and articulate, he masked a cruel streak that unnerved those who knew him well. Andrews, younger and more impressionable, fell under Pierre's influence, their friendship forged in the barracks and strengthened by shared grievances. Neither had a serious criminal record at the time, but Pierre's troubled past hinted at a propensity for violence. Raised in an unstable environment, he had a history of erratic behavior, though he concealed it behind a polished demeanor. Andrews, by contrast, was quieter, often following Pierre's lead without question. By 1972, the pair's conversations took a dark turn. What began as idle talk of committing a robbery evolved into something far more sinister. They weren't driven solely by greed. As later evidence would reveal, they craved the thrill of dominating others, of wielding absolute control. They spoke casually of robbing a business and eliminating any witnesses, their discussions laced with a chilling detachment. Pierre, in particular, was reported to have suggested that murder could be part of the fun if their plans went awry. Over the next year, their ideas grew more concrete. They scouted potential targets, weighing the risks and rewards of various locations. By late 1973, their attention settled on the Hi-Fi Shop, a small audio equipment store in Ogden that sold high-end stereos, speakers, and tape decks, items that could be easily resold on the black market. The store's small staff and late operating hours made it an ideal target. The planning phase was over. A scheme hatched in 1972 was about to unfold with devastating consequences. On the evening of April 22, 1974, Dale Pierre and William Andrews executed their meticulously planned crime. Just before closing time, they entered the Hi-Fi Shop, armed with handguns and prepared for violence. Inside, two employees, Stanley Walker, 20, and Michelle Ansley, 18, were finishing their shifts, unaware of the danger approaching. Pierre and Andrews moved swiftly, brandishing their weapons and ordering the employees to comply. Within moments, Stanley and Michelle were bound with duct tape and forced into the store's basement, their hands tied tightly behind their backs. The situation escalated when 16-year-old Byron Courtney Naisbitt, a friend of Stanley's, entered the store to check on him. Caught off guard, Courtney was quickly overpowered, bound, and taken to the basement alongside the others. As the night wore on, two more unsuspecting individuals arrived, drawn by concern for their loved ones. Orrin Walker, Stanley's father, came looking for his son, while Carol Naisbitt, Courtney's mother, arrived searching for her missing teenager. Both were captured, bound, and herded into the basement, bringing the total number of hostages to 5. The captives, now huddled in the dimly lit basement, faced an uncertain fate, their fear palpable as they exchanged glances, silently pleading for a way out. What followed was a descent into unimaginable cruelty, a scene so horrific it would haunt investigators for years. Inspired by a method they had seen in a movie, Pierre and Andrews attempted to kill their hostages by forcing them to drink liquid Drano, a highly caustic drain cleaner. They believed it would cause a quick and undetectable death, erasing evidence of their crime. Instead, the chemical inflicted excruciating pain, burning the victims' mouths, throats, and stomachs. Blisters formed, swelling blocked airways, and internal injuries ravaged their bodies. Several victims were gagged, intensifying their suffering as they struggled to breathe through the agony. The plan was failing. Drano did not kill quickly or quietly as the perpetrators had hoped. Frustrated by the slow deaths, Pierre resorted to more direct violence. He began shooting the hostages one by one, his actions methodical and devoid of hesitation. Stanley Walker was shot in the head, his life extinguished in an instant. Michelle Ansley suffered the same fate, her dreams of a bright future snuffed out. Carol Naisbitt was also fatally shot, collapsing in the basement that had become a chamber of horrors. Courtney Naisbitt was shot in the head, but against all odds clung to life, his survival a miracle amid the bloodshed. Orrin Walker, Stanley's father, endured a gunshot wound in a brutal attempt at strangulation with a cord, yet he too survived, his resilience defying the killer's intent. With their victims dead or dying, Pierre and Andrews loaded the stolen stereo equipment into a van and fled, leaving behind a scene of carnage that would shock the city. Hours later, one of the shop's owners returned and discovered the gruesome aftermath. First responders arrived to a scene that seasoned officers described as one of the most horrific in Ogden's history. The basement reeked of chemicals and blood, the victims' bodies bearing witness to the unimaginable suffering they had endured. The investigation launched immediately, driven by a community desperate for answers. Within 24 hours, a breakthrough emerged. A teenage boy living near Hill Air Force Base came forward, reporting overheard conversations between Pierre and Andrews about a planned robbery. This tip, combined with physical evidence, directed police to the military base just miles from the crime scene. A witness's account of seeing two men in blue Air Force coveralls carrying a large box from the shop the previous night further narrowed the focus. A search of a nearby dumpster uncovered damning evidence: duct tape, empty bottles, and a receipt for drain cleaner, all traced back to the base's exchange store. Search warrants were issued, and when officers entered the barracks shared by Pierre and Andrews, they found stolen stereo equipment, a list of serial numbers and handwritten notes detailing the robbery plan. A chilling discovery came in the form of a magazine article about the perfect crime, suggesting the pair had studied ways to eliminate witnesses. Fingerprints matched to Pierre and Andrews sealed their fate, and they were arrested alongside a third airman, Keith Roberts, who had helped plan the robbery and acted as a getaway driver but was not present during the killings. Charged with multiple counts of murder, attempted murder, aggravated robbery, and kidnapping, Pierre and Andrews faced a trial that gripped Ogden and beyond. The courtroom was packed daily with journalists, community members, and the families of both victims and accused, all drawn to the case's shocking brutality. The trial, which began in late 1974, was a somber affair, marked by emotional testimony and overwhelming evidence. Orrin Walker, who had survived the Drano ingestion, gunshot, and strangulation attempt, took the stand with remarkable composure. His voice steady but heavy with grief, he recounted the terror of watching his son die and enduring his own ordeal. He identified Pierre and Andrews as the attackers, his memory sharp despite the trauma. Courtney Naisbitt, the teenage survivor, also testified, his words carrying the weight of a life forever altered by a bullet to the brain. Medical examiners provided harrowing details, explaining how the Drano had burned the victims' throats and stomachs, causing prolonged agony rather than instant death. Prosecutors emphasized the premeditation behind the choice of Drano, noting that Pierre and Andrews had drawn inspiration from violent films, selecting the method for its supposed efficiency. The prosecution's case was bolstered by physical evidence, fingerprints, stolen goods, and incriminating notes, along with confessions from the defendants, who offered little in the way of remorse. Pierre's demeanor during the trial was unsettling. At times, he appeared detached, his face expressionless as the horrors were recounted. Other moments revealed a disturbing pride in the chaos he had wrought. Andrews, by contrast, seemed nervous and subdued, his passivity a stark contrast to Pierre's dominance. The jury, unmoved by attempts to shift blame, deliberated carefully before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. In 1975, both Pierre and Andrews were sentenced to death, while Keith Roberts, convicted of aggravated robbery, received a prison sentence. The verdicts were met with widespread support in Utah, where the community viewed the death penalty as a fitting response to the crime's brutality. The case sparked controversy beyond Ogden, particularly internationally. Critics, including human rights organizations in Europe and Asia, argued that racial bias may have influenced the sentencing, as Pierre and Andrews were black, while the victims were white. In contrast, Roberts, who was white, received a lighter sentence despite his role in the planning. The U.S. government defended the trial's fairness, pointing to the overwhelming evidence in survivor testimony. Despite numerous appeals, the death sentences were upheld. Dale Pierre was executed by lethal injection on August 28, 1987, showing little emotion and offering no formal apology. William Andrews followed on July 30, 1992, after exhausting all legal avenues. Both executions took place at the Utah State Prison, marking the end of a long and painful chapter. The hi-fi shop murders left a permanent scar on Ogden, shattering its sense of safety and becoming one of the most infamous crimes in Utah's history. The community rallied around the survivors and victims' families, their grief tempered by a resolve to heal. Schools and public buildings bolstered security, and community programs focused on crime prevention, reflecting a newfound awareness of vulnerability. The case became a case study in criminal psychology and crime scene management, studied by law enforcement and FBI behavioral units for its insights into premeditated cruelty, group dynamics, and the dangers of unchecked influence. Orrin Walker, who lost his son and bore physical and emotional scars, emerged as a symbol of resilience. He lived for many years, using his platform to speak about justice and the power of survival, his voice a beacon for those touched by trauma. Courtney Naisbitt, despite the lasting effects of his brain injury, lived a quiet life away from the public eye, his survival an inspiration to others. The hi-fi shop building was eventually demolished, replaced by a memorial plaque honoring Stanley Walker, Michelle Ansley, and Carol Naisbitt, whose lives were stolen, and celebrating the courage of Orrin Walker and Courtney Naisbitt. The planning that began in 1972 led to a night of horror that Ogden would never forget. Though justice was served in a legal sense, the pain inflicted on the victims and their loved ones lingered, a solemn reminder of the devastation wrought by premeditated cruelty. The hi-fi murders stand as a testament to the strength of a community that refused to be defined by tragedy, choosing instead to honor the memory of those lost through truth, courage, and unity.